Today, I stand here not to beg, not to plead. I stand here to tell the world that Africa's wounds will bleed no more. We have been called beggars, a land of chaos and corruption. But the truth is, we have built from ruins, survived storms of history, and still stand tall. We do not want your power. We want our own peace. And from this day forward, we will speak with our own voice, not through anyone else's mouth.
His eyes swept across the crowd, each word landing like a hammer blow on the hearts of those listening. But as the applause erupted, in a room halfway across the world, a man who had been watching the entire speech through a screen allowed himself a faint smile. He knew that this moment would not only change Burkina Faso, but would ignite a confrontation he had been waiting for a very long time. As the cheers still echoed across the square, thousands of miles away, in a glass-walled room overlooking the Potomac River, a man sat motionless before a screen. On it, the image of Traoré delivering his speech still played, each word striking like a hammer blow against the silence. His name was Marcus Kane, a political strategist who had taken part in dozens of covert interventions abroad. But this time, he wasn't taking notes or replaying clips as he usually did. Instead, Marcus sat quietly, his eyes locked on the soldier's face. "Interesting," he murmured, his voice a mix of curiosity and caution. Marcus knew well that the world only needed a single symbol to shift the balance of power, and what he had just witnessed was exactly that moment. Scenarios raced through his mind, the reactions from world capitals, the shifting networks of money and media, and, most importantly, whether he should step out of the shadows to intervene in this unfolding battle. But one thing he knew for certain. From this moment on, this was no longer just Burkina Faso's story. It was a wake-up call for an entire continent, and a direct challenge to men like him. Marcus leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing as he reached for the secure phone on his desk. His fingers hovered over the keypad for a moment, not out of hesitation but calculation. He knew that the first move in a game like this was the most important. With a single call, he could activate a web of contacts. Lobbyists in Brussels, media executives in New York, former intelligence officers scattered across 3 continents. Each of them owed him favors. Each of them could help twist a story until truth bent under the weight of perception. "Patch me through to Langston," he said to the voice on the other end. Within seconds, Victoria Langston's face appeared on his encrypted screen, composed, sharp-eyed, already expecting the call. "You saw it?" Marcus asked. "I saw it," she replied. "And if we don't move fast, the narrative gets away from us." Marcus allowed himself a thin smile. "Then let's not waste time." Outside his window, the Potomac shimmered in the fading afternoon light. Inside, 2 of the most calculating minds in modern geopolitics began laying out the first steps of a campaign that would stretch from the dusty streets of West Africa to the marble halls of global power. On the other side of the globe, the blazing sun poured down on the faded tin rooftops of Ouagadougou. In a small room tucked behind the presidential residence, Ibrahim Traoré sat at a worn wooden desk, pen in hand, jotting short lines into an old notebook. The city's noise drifted in through a half-open window, the rush of motorbikes, children's laughter mixed with street vendors' calls. Yet inside the room, the air was thick with an unusual focus. An aide stepped in, handing him the latest reports. Lists of depleted food warehouses, neighborhoods enduring long blackouts, and intelligence about several foreign journalists who had just arrived in the city. Traoré nodded slightly, his eyes never leaving the notebook. "We'll speak to the people," he said, his voice low but steady. "They must know the truth, even if it's hard to hear." The aide hesitated. "But sir, some will say, we're making ourselves weaker." Traoré looked up, his gaze unwavering. "True weakness is staying silent in the face of injustice, speaking out, even at a cost. That's strength." Outside, the hot desert wind swept through the dusty streets. And somewhere, half a world away, the plan to counter those very words had already begun to move. In Washington, the late afternoon light had begun to turn the Potomac River gold. Inside a glass-walled office high above the city, Marcus Kane and Victoria Langston sat facing each other across an encrypted video feed. There were no pleasantries between them, only the sound of keystrokes and calculating glances. "You realize, if we let him keep talking like this, the story will move beyond our reach, Victoria said, her tone as dry as if she were discussing a technical project. Marcus gave a slight nod, twirling a pen between his fingers. The problem isn't him. The problem is the symbol he's becoming. They both knew that in this world, the most dangerous thing wasn't a strong leader. It was a leader who was trusted completely by his people. Victoria leaned forward, pulling a list from her folder. We start with the supply chain, delay a few food shipments, stall some aid packages. If people start to feel the inconvenience, they'll start asking questions. Marcus glanced at the list, a faint smirk touching his lips. And I'll handle the rest. Make sure that anyone who searches his name online finds nothing but suspicion and controversy. Outside the window, the lights of the U.S. Capitol began to flicker on, reflecting off the river. Inside, the two remained silent, but what they had just agreed upon would soon send invisible waves surging toward West Africa. In Ouagadougou, the sun had set, but the city was alive in a different way. Street stalls glowed under oil lamps, casting a warm golden light across faces weathered by a long day under the sun. In a small hall tucked behind a community cultural center, Ibrahim Traore stood before a group of village chiefs and youth representatives from rural areas. There were no cameras, no media, just a direct, unfiltered conversation. A middle-aged man, his skin tanned from years in the fields, rose to speak. Mr. President, we've heard that aid shipments will be delayed. Is it because of what you said to the world? Traoré was silent for a moment, locking eyes with the man. Yes, he said, his voice even but firm. They want you to believe I'm the reason your family's meal is missing. But the truth is, this is the price we pay for refusing to bow. A young woman in a traditional dress stood next. And if that price becomes too high, sir? Traoré stepped forward, the lamplight illuminating his face. The price that's too high is when our children grow up still being seen as beggars. We can endure an empty plate for a night, but we cannot live without dignity forever. The room fell silent, his words etched into every heart. They knew hardship was coming, but they also knew they were standing at a crossroads of history, where silence meant retreat and speaking out meant moving forward. In Washington, the clock on the wall read 9 p.m., but Victoria Langston's office was still lit. On her desk, multiple screens displayed streams of data, cargo shipment charts, maps of aid routes, and public sentiment analysis reports from across the globe. Marcus Kane stood by the window, holding a glass of red wine, his gaze fixed on the distant city lights. He's speaking directly to the people, Marcus said without turning. No media filter, no diplomatic channel. That's more dangerous than you think. Victoria scanned a report, her lips pressed tightly together. The real danger is that every time he speaks, people believe him more. Marcus set the glass down and stepped closer. We just need to create a crack. We don't have to break him outright, just make a portion of the population doubt him, and the rest will fracture on their own. Victoria gave a slight nod. I'll arrange for a few internal sources to plant questions about his decisions. You make sure every international outlet uses question marks instead of full stops. For a few seconds, the room fell silent, broken only by the steady hum of the air conditioner. Outside, Washington's night was deceptively calm. But inside this office, a plan was being woven, precise, cold, and designed to leave no trace, unless it succeeded. In Ouagadougou, the next morning dawned under a gray sky, as if foreshadowing a day full of challenges. Along the road to the central square, small groups of people gathered, whispering to one another. Rumors about delayed aid shipments had spread faster than any newspaper or radio broadcast. Inside the presidential residence, Ibrahim Traoré sat with a circle of close advisors. On the table lay a map of the country, marked with the regions most at risk of severe food shortages. Some village chiefs are starting to worry, one advisor reported. They say the people will blame the government if this drags on. Traoré folded his arms, eyes fixed on the map. Then we'll go there. Not to justify ourselves, but to show them we stand with them. Another advisor hesitated. Sir, if the other side learns where you're going, they could use the media to smear you, cut and twist images to... Let them try, Traoré interrupted, his tone calm but firm. The real image is stronger than anything they can edit. And when the people see us standing right beside them, they'll know who's telling the truth. Outside, the beat of drums from a group of young people echoed through the streets. mixed with chants of support. No one in the room knew exactly what the coming days would bring, but they all understood. This battle was no longer confined to negotiation tables or TV screens. It was unfolding right in the heart of the streets. In Washington, it was nearing midnight, but Marcus Kane's office was still lit. The glow from his computer screens reflected off his focused face. On the monitor was a map of Burkina Faso, with regions color-coded according to public discontent, based on media data and reports from local sources. Victoria Langston entered, carrying a fresh stack of files. "We've just learned he's leaving the capital, heading to the food shortage regions." Marcus looked up, a faint, cold smile crossing his lips. "Good. That will give us the perfect images to work with." Victoria set the files down on the desk. "We'll release short clips of empty warehouses, cut together with shots of people complaining. No need to lie too much. Just let viewers conclude on their own that it's his fault." Marcus swiveled his chair toward the window where the city lights shimmered over the Potomac River. "Remember, in this game, the truth is only one version of the story, and we decide which version spreads." Victoria gave a slight nod before leaving the room, leaving Marcus alone with the map and its red lines connecting Burkina Faso's capital to far-flung rural areas. Outside, Washington lay in deceptive calm, but here, a storm of information was already forming. In a rural area more than 200 kilometers from the capital, Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré stepped out of a dust-covered off-road vehicle. Around him were sagging thatched roofs and fields cracked from a long drought. Villagers gathered, curiosity and hope mingling in their eyes as they saw the president arrive in the middle of their community. There was no heavy security cordon, only a few soldiers standing at a distance, leaving space for Traoré to walk into the crowd. A mother holding a small child stepped forward, her expression weary yet resolute. "Sir, they say it's because of you that the rice hasn't arrived on time," she said, her voice catching. Traoré looked at the child, then raised his gaze to meet hers. "They say that because they're afraid you'll learn the truth. The delay in food isn't because we don't want it, it's because someone wants you to believe we can't stand on our own." An elderly man with a cane stepped closer, his voice raspy. "Then what is the truth?" Traoré took a deep breath, gesturing toward the barren fields. "The truth is, they want you to give up. And I will not abandon you, even if I have to come to every village, even if I have to speak to every family." The murmurs in the crowd faded, replaced by exchanged glances as if a spark had been lit. In the distance, a foreign journalist with a hidden camera inside her bag quietly recorded every moment. These images would leave the village alongside the rumors, but no one knew which version would spread first. In Washington, a notification ping echoed through the small conference room where Victoria Langston sat. She opened her laptop, and on the screen appeared a video just sent by a freelance journalist on the ground in Burkina Faso. The footage was grainy, but clear enough to show Ibrahim Traoré standing in the middle of a circle of villagers, pointing toward cracked, barren fields, his voice carrying power even without a microphone. Marcus Kane stepped closer, standing behind Victoria, studying each frame carefully. "Poor quality, but the emotion is intact," he observed. "This is the kind of image that can ruin an entire campaign." Victoria leaned back in her chair, eyes fixed on the screen. "If we don't respond quickly, this video will be everywhere within hours." Marcus took a sip of coffee, then set the cup down. "Then cut it up. Take the most questionable lines, strip away the context, and let the media fill in the rest. Once the story mutates, no one will remember what the original was." Victoria nodded, her fingers already typing out instructions to the media team. Outside, Washington remained shrouded in darkness, but inside this room, an invisible race had begun, a race between the truth and the version they would create. In the afternoon in Ouagadougou, a light rain fell, a rare shower in the dry season. On the worn-out phones of locals, a video clip began spreading rapidly through WhatsApp and Facebook. In the clip, Ibrahim Traoré stood among a crowd of villagers, but his words had been cut and spliced. Viewers heard only disjointed phrases. "Food, not coming. We cannot stand on our own." No context, no explanation. At a small cafe near the city center, a group of young men huddled around a wooden table, watching and debating. One frowned. Did he really say that? If it's true, that's worrying. In a distant village, the mother who had stood before Traoré the other day watched the clip on a neighbor's phone. She clenched her sleeve, knowing exactly what he had said and why. They're trying to make him look like a failure, she said bitterly. Inside the presidential residence, Traoré received a report from his internal communications team. He watched the doctored clip once, then turned off the screen. It's fine, he said calmly. We'll respond, but not with arguments, with actions. Outside, the sound of rain mingled with the engines of vehicles preparing to depart. He knew that the best way to fight a lie was to let people see the truth with their own eyes. In Victoria Langston's office, a large wall-mounted screen displayed constantly shifting graphs, shares, comments, and regional spread patterns. The red lines on the chart shot upward like rockets. Marcus Kane stood with his arms crossed, eyes fixed on a digital map of Africa glowing with clusters of red. 52,000 shares in under 2 hours, he said slowly, and no sign of slowing down. Victoria nodded, her gaze still calculating. Good. The more people doubt him, the harder it will be for him to regain the narrative. Marcus glanced at a secondary screen showing comments in multiple languages. French, English, Swahili. We've reached enough demographics to create a ripple effect. Victoria gave a thin smile. Now we just wait for his reaction. He'll have to choose, stay silent, or respond. And in either case, we've already won half the battle. Marcus leaned back in his chair, but there was no relaxation in his eyes. He knew all too well, once this game begins, no one walks away without paying a price. In a small meeting room inside the presidential residence, an old screen replayed the doctored video that had spread across the internet. On the table, a few foreign newspapers lay scattered among internal security reports. A young advisor, his voice edged with worry, said, "Sir, this clip is being replayed on international channels. If we don't speak up now, they'll believe that version." Traoré leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the distorted image of himself on the screen. He didn't look angry, only thoughtful. If they've already decided to believe a lie, then a denial won't change anything. Another advisor interjected, "So what do we do, just let them smear you?" Traoré stood, walking to the window where he could see the motorcade being readied in the courtyard. "We go. We'll visit the places they say I've abandoned. Let the people see me, touch me, hear me, without a screen, without an intermediary." He turned back, his steady gaze sweeping across the room. "And to the outside world, they'll have to choose. Believe the spliced footage, or believe the thousands who will tell them what they saw with their own eyes." Outside, the sound of engines starting mixed with the faint patter of lingering rain on the tin roof. A new battle was about to begin. Not on a screen, but on the red dirt roads leading deep into the heart of the country. In Victoria Langston's office, the air was thick with the scent of strong coffee and the steady clatter of a printer. On the desk lay a series of images pulled from social media, photos of Traoré shaking hands with locals, holding children, and standing in the middle of dusty markets. Marcus Kane slid the stack of photos toward Victoria. "He's using these very images to fight back. If they spread, our story will lose ground." Victoria frowned, her fingers tapping lightly on the desk. "Then we'll make them disappear from the feed. Push other content instead. Food shortages, security instability, anything that distracts public attention." Marcus walked over to the strategy board on the wall, where red arrows connected Burkina Faso to major media hubs around the world. "I'll call a few editors. We'll accidentally leak an internal security report, enough to make tomorrow's headlines something he can't control." Victoria smiled thinly, like the edge of a blade. "We don't need to win right away. We just have to keep him busy putting out fires long enough for his supporters to grow tired." Outside, the Washington night was calm as if nothing were happening. But within these four walls, each move was calculated to turn every news item, every image, into another piece of an invisible war. In Ouagadougou, the morning newspapers were snatched up from the stands as soon as they were laid out. The front pages didn't feature images of Traoré shaking hands with villagers or touring rural markets. Instead, bold headlines screamed, "Leaked internal security report. Rising instability in Burkina Faso. In cafes, radios replayed the same short news segment between music programs. Sources report that security conditions in certain areas are worsening, threatening the food supply. At the presidential press office, a young advisor frowned at the computer screen. People are talking more about the security crisis than your trip yesterday. Social media is flooded with rumors. Traoré stood by the window looking down at the courtyard where small groups of citizens were waiting to see him. That's exactly their goal, to scatter our focus, to make sure people aren't paying attention to what matters most. He turned, his voice steady. We won't chase rumors. We stick to the schedule. If they want to flood the air with noise, we'll let the people see the truth, right in front of them. Outside, the city's noise blended with the blare of loudspeakers, each broadcasting a different version of events. But inside this room, a counteroffensive was already in the works, not to win immediately, but to keep the fire of trust from being extinguished. In a closed office, Victoria Langston stood before a large screen displaying the schedule of upcoming international events. A red circle surrounded the date of the United Nations Summit. Marcus Kane pointed at it. This is our chance. If we can turn his speech into a lightning rod for controversy, all his image building will collapse. Victoria nodded, placing a thick dossier on the table. We'll release a leaked report right before the summit, accusing Burkina Faso of diverting aid for military purposes. Whether it's true or not doesn't matter. Noise is what we need. Marcus smirked. One well-timed hit, and he'll be busy explaining himself instead of saying what he came to say. In the presidential residence, Traoré was reviewing plans for the summit. An advisor leaned in and whispered, We've heard they'll launch a smear right before your speech. Traoré gave a faint smile. Then we'll move first. He ordered his media team to prepare a short documentary showing aid shipments being delivered directly into the hands of the people, with testimony from village chiefs and families receiving the support. We'll play it at the summit before I say a single word, Traoré said. Let the images speak before I do. Spotlights bathed the vast conference hall. World leaders, journalists, and hundreds of photographers aimed their lenses at the podium. When Burkina Faso's turn came, the massive screen lit up, not with an immediate speech, but with the documentary Traoré had brought. Vivid images filled the hall. Him handing sacks of rice to an elderly woman, children receiving notebooks, trucks carrying supplies along dusty roads. The hall was utterly silent. When the film ended, Traoré stepped to the microphone. They can splice my words, but they cannot splice the smiles of the people you just saw. This is our truth. In Langston's office, the air was taut. Marcus stared at the live feed from the summit, his face hardening. He just turned our stage into his own. Victoria said nothing, her eyes fixed on the numbers flashing on her screen. Traoré's approval graph spiking, global social media flooded with hashtags supporting Burkina Faso. Back in Burkina Faso, tens of thousands poured into the streets to welcome Traoré home. He stepped out of the vehicle with no speech, simply walking into the crowd, shaking hands, embracing those who had traveled far to see him. His voice rose above the cheers. We did not remain silent, and that is the greatest victory. Meanwhile, in Washington, Victoria Langston switched off the screen and quietly gathered her files. She knew the war wasn't over, but today she had lost. In the age of information, battles are no longer fought only with weapons, but with words, images, and the stories we choose to believe. They tried to bend the truth until it broke. They tried to make dignity seem like defiance and solidarity look like weakness. But in the end, what they feared most was not a speech or a summit. It was a people who refused to be silent. Because silence is the oxygen of control. And the moment you speak, not in whispers, but in a voice that carries across continents, that control begins to crumble. This was never just about Burkina Faso. It was about the power of a story told by those who have lived it, and the courage to tell it in full. And perhaps that is the lesson they'll remember long after the headlines fade. You can cut a speech, you can twist an image, but you can't fake the look in someone's eyes when they've decided to stand.